Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. Today's special guest is award-winning audio engineer and senior specialist for live sound products at AVID, Robert Scovill. Robert is a modern-day Renaissance man with interests and activities spanning the wide breadth of professional audio. He's a 40-year veteran of the professional concert and sound recording industry and has mixed more than 4,000 events in his career. Robert's engineering and production talents have been enlisted by a veritable who's who of marquee acts, including Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Matchbox 20, Jackson Browne, Rush, Def Leppard, and Prince, to name a few, and his body of live sound and recording work has resulted in numerous industry accolades and awards, including 6 TEC Awards for technical and creative achievement in sound reinforcement, and 2 PLSN Parnelli Awards for Live Sound Engineer of the Year. Outside of his work in live music, Robert has consulted on and driven significant advancement in hardware, software, and workflow design for AVID's Venue line of live sound products. He is commonly regarded as the pioneer of the virtual sound check and creator of multi-track archiving workflows for live sound, reshaping the live sound landscape forever. Joining us today for a conversation that spans his wild, wonderful years in audio engineering and his experience in driving forward future audio technology, please join us in welcoming to the show, Robert Scovill. Hey, Robert, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
I am doing good. How are you guys this morning?
Very well.
Doing great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're thrilled to make this finally happen between our reschedule, your reschedule, and some COVID mishaps and just everything. This is like, the show. I mean, basically,
welcome to the modern world.
Yeah, right.
It's just where we live these days, right?
Exactly. Well, this is the last live show we're going to tape before the end of the year. So this is like a big one, right? This is like the culmination of a year of episodes and stuff. So we're really excited to pull this one off and make it happen.
Nice. Thank you for the invite. Very cool to be here.
So, Robert, let's take a trip back in the Wayback Machine and talk about your early days, because I love hearing how you got into it, what kind of got you into audio to begin with, and then the first few years of your career.
Well, it's all pretty well documented, but we'll recap it here. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version for sure. I think I'm a little bit of an outlier in this business. Maybe not. I don't know. But I kind of knew I wanted to get into this side of the business at a pretty young age. By the time I was about, 13, 14, freshman in high school, I kind of knew it's like, that's what I want to do. So everything I started doing after that was kind of geared toward getting there. So, high school counselors, et cetera, they were absolutely no help in, 1978. This was still such a cottage industry in 1978, certainly from the live sound side of it. Recording was a little more established, but, live sound, we were only 10 years removed from Woodstock at that point, so it was still very, very early. A lot of the gear that industry was really just coming of age. But that said, I kind of decided, okay, well, it seems technical, I'll kind of go to college for, to study electronics and blah, 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 and did that. And just happened to get the opportunity to go to work for a sound company locally in Kansas City, a little regional company that was, looking for volunteers to help out on a weekend. They were doing these big shows, these big, 10, 12,000 people for, a weekend, outdoor weekend events. So, I started showing up and helping out with that. And really, once I got there, I was like, yep, this is what I'm going to do.
I'm hooked.
Yeah. I was right. This is what I'm going to do. And, just was able to just kind of, there were some things that fell into place really nicely for me living in Kansas City. Look, I'm in the middle of the country. This is not a media center by any stretch of the imagination. But as fortune would have it, there was a band that came out of there at that time that got signed to a very big deal with Virgin Records. And they had a lot of success. I call them the biggest band that nobody ever heard of, this band called Shooting Star out of Kansas City.
Okay.
So I ended up working with them, and we did tons of touring, and, I was with them through, I didn't work with them on their records per se, short of just assisting. I was working as a band guy and one of their live sound guys, but was stuck with them through 5 records and, a whole bunch of shows, and was smart enough to parlay that into a career, where you get out. We were lucky enough where we were out working as an opening act, for everybody during that period in the early 80s. And I was smart enough to make a lot of contacts and try to make a big enough impression on people to get a job and carry on my career. So, it was a lot of work. It took a lot of dedication, a lot of working for not very much money. And, you just got to be persistent, if you want something. I mean, you just got to go after it and just not take no for an answer. Or, if you do have to take no, just go try again. So
Exactly.
So it's funny hearing
it takes
your
some
sort of-
dedication.
yeah, your sort of interest in music very early. Mike and I have sort of similar experiences, and actually, I think sort of both worked our way into the music business the same way, which was just kind of hang out long enough that you could find something to do, and you
just show up.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny that you're in Kansas City. My first tour day ever was at the Beaumont in Kansas City.
Oh my gosh,
so,
yeah.
it was kind of funny. I mean, this is in 2001, I guess, and so I mean, I got that bug early too, but I came in through like street teams and street marketing and doing all that kind of stuff, and then ended up road managing and doing stuff like that. So I wasn't there on the technical side, more on the marketing side.
Well, I mean, I definitely started out wanting to be a musician, no doubt about it. I mean, I was playing drums from the time I was about 8, 9 years old, all the way through school and into my 20s, et cetera. Playing in bands in Kansas City when I was still working as a sound guy. And one of the best things that happened in Kansas City, and this is where I do think Kansas City was a little bit of an outlier. They had an incredible club scene there in the late 70s and early 80s. And not only did they have a club scene where, lots of bands were playing, but they had a lot of, for some reason, I don't know what drove this culture there, but there were a lot of sound guys there and a lot of lighting guys there who were kind of building their own rigs and kind of designing their own speakers and, so-and-so is going to be playing the block. He's going to use this new PA that he built, I mean, it was that kind of thing, and there was this underground culture of that there, and it was really fertile ground. And luckily the kind of the centerpiece of that was this company called Superior Sound in Kansas City. And, they were always holding clinics and always, talking about how to do certain things. And keep in mind, this, like I said, this was 1979, I mean, what were you teaching back then? You were teaching speaker design. You were teaching what crossovers actually do. And I mean, there was nothing digital, nothing.
Yeah,
I mean, it did not exist at that point. It was pure
effects
analog.
processors weren't even around.
No, I mean, if you were going to use a reverb, it was probably a spring reverb, a rack mounted spring reverb in a box out there, I mean, by the time the early 80s rolled around, we just started to see our first, digital delays that would be used for music production, I mean, so, you really had to lean into fundamentals and understand how and why things worked. So, it fueled this culture of it there. And I look back on it now, it would be fantastic to go back and do a little research on the, let's call it the coaching tree, right? Of production people that came out of that era in Kansas City. It would probably blow your mind. It would boggle your mind. It was really a cool place to grow up and get into it. It really was.
For someone like me, who's kind of like come out of, everything's been, since I got into it, everything's been digital. Nothing's been analog. Coming from that world, like back to think of like the sound companies having to build their own cabinets and build their own whatever the mixers or whatever they're trying to do to just get the job done.
Yeah.
That just is amazing to hear those kind of stories. Let's talk about. So you just got off of the tour with that first band. Who was like the first real second or third real touring artist that you worked with? Was it Tom Petty? Was that what I?
Oh, no, I didn't run into Tom Petty till years and years later. So this was, if you want to talk about the early 80s, I mean, probably my first step into the real big time was probably the Go-Go's, and then kind of leading into John Mellencamp, that era right there, around 82, 83, somewhere around there, I mean, I had some little kind of one-off scenarios with some big acts, some big country acts in that time, that I would go out and work with for, 4 or 5 weeks, et cetera. But, where it was a full-fledged tour, here we go, you're on the seat and you're going to be mixing, it was those two gigs that really kind of got me going there. So that was my first glimpse at real touring,
So what changed in that first real tour, coming from, just working at home, doing your own thing? obviously the equipment upgrade. You're working on multiple shows. Are you on the bus with the band? Are you in your own? Like, tell us just some stories from on the road in the early days.
At that period, I mean, it was bus touring, no question about it. I mean, this was bus touring, semis full of gear, et cetera. I had kind of through my work with Shooting Star and meeting people, I had kind of hooked up with this company called Electrotech out of Canoga Park, California, and ended up moving to California to go to work for them at the same time. It was that company was like a derivative or a next gen version of TFA Electrosound, if you want to look up that name. I mean, that's one of the stalwart companies that helped start this business. So they had a big pedigree and very powerful company at the time. So it was a big deal to get hooked up with them and get accepted by them and have them start lobbying acts on my behalf to get the work. So but it's one of those things. It's like, be careful what you ask for. You get the gig, you have to perform. It's like, okay, here's the gig, go to work, let's see what you got. But the touring at that time was it was cool. I mean, that we were playing big venues. I mean, that was a neat thing. It was a big step up in responsibility as well as expectation.
So on something like that, on a big national tour or something where you're doing several, maybe arenas in a row or something like that, is that better for you as a sound engineer or worse than sort of like the one-off gigs? Like, I mean, it seems to me that you could start to establish some presets and things like that. Although every venue is totally different in terms of the way the sound moves around and stuff like that.
Well,
here's where it's
an advantage. And I think I picked up on this early on. If you have the same console and PA system every night, and are mixing the same band every night, what you start to realize is the impact that rooms are having on your result. It's like, hey, don't discount what the room is going to do to this actually taking place here tonight. So, it was a great school for that. Whereas if you're changing consoles and you're changing PAs every night, and, even if you're mixing the same band, it's kind of a moving target. It's like, well, I don't know why it's sounding like this. Maybe it's the PA, maybe it's the band. Maybe it's the console. I don't know, because everything's changing every night. So, that kind of bleeds into something that I started teaching for a long time once I got into kind of mentorship and started teaching things. Is like, what you need to do is start building constants in what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Find the things that are consistent night to night and then deal with the variables every day and try to make them consistent, right? So, that's the big advantage, I think, to the touring side of it. Where you get some consistency in the band that's playing every day.
Well, it seems like it would build a really useful skill set for a sound engineer versus, like, let's say you work at a bar or a club or something where you have an established room, an established sound system, all that kind of stuff, and you can just sort of set things up for the room, tweak a little for the band or whatever. But the room is the room and it's always the same gear. It seems like for the guy who maybe comes up through those ranks and just works as a sound engineer in a club like that, maybe wouldn't have the chops or the ear or the whatever it is to be able to sort of make the adapting moves or, be able to jump around as much as you do in a live.
Well, making that move from clubs to arenas, if you want to talk about that big a jump, is a real challenge. I mean, it's a real deal because, you talk about being thrown from the pond into the ocean. I mean, that's what it's like. And, if I've seen anything consistently over the years, and this continues today, is that, one of the challenges in building a technique, certainly in the early portion of the 80s, is there was nobody to teach you anything. I mean, it was all the school of hard knocks, right? I mean, you learn it through making mistakes and blah, blah, blah. But the danger that comes with that, what that also built was you can build a foundation of really flawed approach in the club scene and in the arena scene for that matter too. But it's really noticeable in the club scene where your technique or your approach is just built on what worked yesterday, right? As opposed to backing off and looking at it and go, well, is that really a sound approach to what I'm doing here or not? You're just surviving there. And, you're only as good as your last show there, really, kind of thing, right? And when you make that transition to arenas or big spaces like stadiums and stuff, man, that can get really revealed. Like if you've got a flawed technique and a flawed approach, it's revealed pretty quickly. So, you're either going to be nimble enough to kind of get yourself back together and, get on board with what actually needs to happen here, or you're not going to survive it. I'll give you another kind of version of this where I've seen guys that have worked in live sound for a long time as mixers, and then are thrust into either broadcast or studio mixing, and fall flat on their face because all of the things they're doing are meant to survive a horrible mixing environment. And now you get into the studio where everything's in high resolution and you hear all the things that you're doing poorly, So it's like, I came from the background where I was doing both live and studio work for a long time. And so this kind of came organically to me. And I've said this many times in these kind of broadcasts and stuff. It's like, guys, if you want to learn how to mix, get in the studio and learn how to mix.
Yeah.
Right. That's where you're going to hear things in resolution. If you can make it work out of a small set of speakers and work dynamically, and where, everything is clear, you can hear it, you can creatively address it the way you want, that's going to work live. Now, there are obviously some boundaries in that. Some of the techniques that are used in the studio, you're not going to get away with in live mixing, but you can do versions of it. And the thing that it builds, this is always the missed part of it when people are talking about, or I'm talking to people about doing this, is what you're doing in the studio is learning how to listen, right? You're learning how to hear and build an expectation so that when you go out in the live field and you push up a fader, you have some idea of what I want it to sound like, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it goes back to this concept of, hey, mixing is a listening skill. It's not a technical skill. Sure, we're surrounded by technology here, but ultimately mixing is a listening skill.
Right? So there's a guy that I follow as well. His name's Dave Ratt. And you probably know him. He worked with the Chili Peppers. And I watch a couple of his tutorial videos as well. And one of the you mentioned, like, when you go on tour with a big national band, you're using the same mics every day, you're using the same console every day. Your EQs on the console are pretty much set. You don't really have to mess with those. When you get into
that's approach to take. That's one approach to take for sure. There are people that go the completely opposite direction, but yeah, carry on.
But what I was going to say is his console, he doesn't have it set up in front. He likes to have it off to the side, and then he'll watch and then make adjustments so he can just sit there and watch the show and listen and then turn and make adjustments. And I thought that was a very unique approach. I had never seen that before. I just, when you brought up the fact that it's, mixing is all about listening, and that's what jumped out to me, was the fact that he watches the show and he listens the whole time and makes minor adjustments.
To say that's unique is accurate. I don't know of anybody else that would have ever done that, but where it's validated, in my opinion, is that he's right. Live sound mixing is a heads up workflow. If you're looking down like this and making adjustments, you're missing the whole game. The game is up here. You have to be watching and make adjustments and try to get audio to fit the visual, right? I mean, it's, we're humans. We're looking and listening at the same time at a show. So your perception of something when you're just listening versus your perception of something when you're watching and listening is very, very different, right? So would I do it that way? I would never do it that way. I need to have my hands on the console while I'm watching and make the adjustment. But I get what he's going for there, right? And honestly, it's a challenge in digital. It really is. It's one of the challenges of digital technology, is that it demands that you look at the technology in order to operate it.
Yeah.
Right. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And it's one of the challenges of that world, where you kind of get disconnected tactilely from the mixing surface. And it's like, that's a danger for live sound, in my opinion.
Yeah. Totally understandable. You've worked with some. Oh, go ahead, Ryan. Did you want
I was
to
just going to say, I thought that was a really interesting observation. I mean, obviously I've been around live music for a long time, but I guess I never really put together that part of the engineer's job is to sort of connect the experience of what you're seeing to what you're hearing.
That is really challenging today.
Yeah, well, and it's clear as day when you point it out, because, like, if something goes wrong, like, that's the first thing you hear, right? I mean, if I don't know, a speaker drops, or somebody bumps a fader or something, like, the first thing you do is go, wait, something's wrong, right? Yeah. And I guess I just never thought of that way. I guess in my mind it was more like an amplification practice, right? It was, you're doing a thing on stage and we're going to make it loud.
I'll tell you where it really gets revealed is in stadiums. right? If you're mixing football stadiums, et cetera, where, somebody goes to take a guitar solo, and, if you were just listening, you think, oh, that's plenty loud enough. That's sitting in front of the mix, et cetera. But then you look up and the guitar player is 60 feet tall on IMAG. And all of a sudden it's just like, well, wait a minute. That doesn't match at all. Right. I need to make that sound as big as it looks right now.
Yeah.
Right. To make it work for the audience. If you don't, then it's just this kind of video thing going on and there's a little audio thing going on, and never the two shall meet,
Right. Well, I even
it's
think
challenging
in watching TV or whatever. I have this really old TV in my bedroom, and whenever we're watching anything that's sort of modern, I don't know why, but there's some sounds that are super, super loud and some sounds that are super, super quiet always.
Well, don't even get me into broadcast audio right now. We're going to be here for a couple more hours for sure if you want to go down that road, because
the point I'm trying to make, though, is that it pulls you totally out of the experience, right? Yeah. Because what you're seeing on screen isn't matching what you think you should be hearing. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to articulate here, is that our mind is set up to believe that we should be hearing a certain thing from what we're seeing.
Yeah. Well,
and so when we don't,
the funny part is, in video, you take cues from the video on what you should hear. Right. I give this as a little test sometimes, a little kind of homework assignment. When I'm doing teaching mixing in places, is like, okay, I want you to, and this is all under the heading of learning to listen while you're hearing, or learning to hear while you're listening, that kind of thing, which was bred into me really, really early by an early mentor of mine. I'll always be thankful of it. But the idea is this: okay, when you're watching video of a music performance, right, try to disconnect yourself from what you're seeing, measuring it against what you're hearing. Like when the video cuts to the piano player, are you actually experiencing the piano now sounding louder in the mix?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you were just listening and not watching the video cut, what would you think of the mix that's happening right now? It's challenging. And I mean, I kind of got this blazed into me on one of my first big video projects that I mixed, where I mixed audio for a concert video. And this was at a time where, syncing video to audio while you were mixing it, I don't want to say it was impossible, but it was just so laborious. It made it not worthwhile, because video had to be the master transport. So if you wanted to rewind the tape machines, you had to rewind the video machine, and blah, blah, blah. It was horrible when you were mixing. So in the situation, I just disconnected video from audio, and I said, I'm just going to mix the audio to the way I should sound, way I think it should sound, and then we'll resync it with video and have a look at it. And man, was it eye-opening. I mean, I was mixing like I was mixing for record, made it, and on its own, it sounded fantastic. Buckle it up with the video now, and it's like, when you're watching it, the audio sounds like it's going all over the place because of the cuts in the video. So it was like, wow, okay, let's start over.
That makes
it really
sense.
Required some thinking of okay, well, if this is the media presentation, there's different mixes that have to happen for this, different kinds of mixes that have to happen for this.
Yeah, I mean, another example, like one of my favorite concert videos is this Live in Texas by Linkin Park, and there's something that happens at the end, and again, it goes to what my mind wants versus what whoever produced it produced, and there's a mismatch between sort of crowd interplay and the singer. So Chester's up on stage and he's saying, and he's saying words and then holding the mic out so people can sing, but you're not hearing them sing. Yeah. So he's just holding it out and you can hear really quiet, something going on, but it's like, okay, so we're missing the callback, the thing that you're trying to do. And so there's a couple elements like that really bum me out in that video. Because that's one of those experiences I want to hang on to. But
that's a real challenge too. And I've gone round and round with this over the years, because I'm a big proponent of live recordings and and live mixes. I mean I can't see it back there, but I've probably got 500, 600 vinyls of just live music, that's been done through the years. I've been studying it for years. And, one thing I've picked up, this was really popular in the 80s, where bands were doing live records and then going in and overdubbing on them to make the performance sound good. Oh, let's redo the guitars. They sound terrible. Oh, let's redo the vocal. It's got all this voice bleed in it. And what ends up happening, a
studio produced album.
It becomes a studio album with some crowd happening in it. And the irony is, the more you overdub on it, the lower the crowd has to be, because those crowd mics have all the previous audio in them, right? So they come up and they don't work together. So, that kind of stems all the way back to another conversation of kind of changing how we do multi-track recording for live shows, and, trying to get this thing where live is actually live and not reproduced, so but there, is all about, and again, it's a whole nother skill in what we do now, is how do we do crowd captures? How do we record crowd and do it well and properly? And, it's becoming a total science now, because it's completely different for how we record crowds for a stereo recording versus how we're going to do it for an immersive recording. It's a big challenge that we haven't cracked yet. I mean, we've got ways to do it now, but boy, it's challenging if you want to do it right.
I can imagine. One of my favorite things to do, I volunteer every Thursday night for an open mic night, and we have some really good musicians here where I'm at. And it's one of my favorite things to do is just hit record on it and try and capture that live sound and capture that live, because the flaws are what make it good, in my opinion. Not necessarily the horrible flaws, but like you can tell that it's live when you can actually tell that
you want
it's
it
live.
To be authentic is the thing.
Yeah,
right.
100%. And you can always tell the difference between a studio track and a live track. And I love the live tracks so much more, just because
that whole mindset is what what made the bootleg market explode in the 80s, because now all of a sudden you had, it kind of drove a wedge between the public and producers, right? All of a sudden producers were starting to be seen as the enemy, because you're changing my artist. What we're getting is your vision of the artist, not the artist vision of the artist. So let me go back. I want to hear the original demos from that record, not the well-produced record. Or I want to hear the desk mix, the desk mix of that live show, not the final product. I mean, there's a huge, huge market for that kind of bubbled up in the 80s, and it still persists today. I mean, all of that still exists today.
Yeah. Well, and so parallels too between sort of the vinyl versus digital kind of conversation too. I've got a friend that's an audiophile guy, and he's got a really fancy machine. And I went over, and he wanted to basically run I brought a little cheapy turntable and some old records over, and he wanted to put it up against whatever music service he was using that, gives you the OGG files and stuff that are all uncompressed and everything. And, he played I don't know, some Beatles track, and it was just, crystal clear perfection, right? I mean, it couldn't be more perfect. And then we played the same song on the record, and just the warmth it brings and all that stuff. It's not the same as live, but the point I'm trying to make is the imperfections are what make it good. It's not so much about this, clinical perfection, I don't think.
Yeah. No, there's some truth to that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about working with artists like Neil Peart and Prince and these perfectionists who are so good at their craft, and you have to come in and try and capture that. Like with Neil Peart, I mean, how do you mic his drum kit? Holy cow, there's so many moving parts. I'm really intrigued at the artist interaction between someone like you and someone like Prince or Neil or guys like that. Do you have any, behind the scenes stories of dealing with that kind of level of talent?
Either of those guys, the thing you have to realize as a mixer for sure, and respect as a mixer for sure, and try to get the artist to respect for sure, is that you are going to interpret their art and present it to the audience. You're the umbilical cord for that. Doesn't make it to the audience without going through me, right? So Either you have to trust my interpretation, or you have to have me be just a pass-through. There is no interpretation that takes place there, right? So ultimately what I'm saying is it ends up having to be collaborative. It has to be collaborative. You have to have some vision of what that music needs to be live, right? And they need to, to learn to trust that and respect that. So there's this collaborative process that has to happen. Now, for somebody like Neil, I'll say this right out of the gate. Neil is totally a perfectionist, but he knows he's never going to get there. Why he works so well is he's on the journey to perfection and will take you along with him if you're willing to go, right? All knowing you'll never get there, but it's the journey that is the reward there, right? So, you have to buy into that kind of thing. And I'm an OCD guy. I think that's why me and Neil played so well together. I'm an OCD guy. I like to take care of details. I don't want to leave a detail unturned in anything like that. So, it played into how we addressed his kit. Now, that said about Neil, maybe unlike maybe any drummer I've ever met before or worked with before, I will say this. He played the most unbelievable mix. I call it a kit mix, where you could just be standing in the room listening to it and go, man, that's the most perfectly balanced drum sound I've ever heard of him just playing it. Yeah. Like, some guys are real cymbal heavy, some guys are real snare heavy, blah, blah, blah. You just sit and listen. You could put up one microphone in front of that freaking drum kit and it would sound like Neil Peart.
Wow.
It was incredible from that regard. So anything you did above and beyond that was really all just detail work. Like, I don't want to miss some of these accents in the big space that he's doing. Right. So obviously I worked a lot in that period with individual miking everything. Of course we did that. We were definitely in that mode. But that said, if I had to go do it again today, I might be a little looser with some of the miking, because the kit was so well put together, so well tuned, so well balanced the way he played it, But it was a big drum kit. I mean, it was 2 drum kits essentially. We had, when I was working with him, we were still in analog. And there was one analog console that was dedicated completely to
just
the drum
for his
kit.
drums.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool.
I mean, it was probably somewhere upwards of, but I remember, it was all microphones and electronics and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a lot of channels. If you had that plus effects returns, it was probably pushing 50 channels for the drum kit.
That's amazing.
So it makes me think, just thinking of artists like him and like Prince, people who are sort of, I guess, notoriously known as true artists or people who have a vision, or, you might call it perfectionist or whatever, but they have a perspective. And I wonder is that a consistent thing that you ran into across sort of like all these high performers? Like, does everybody have that? So there's this level of perfection and this level of artistry, or are there plenty of guys that are just kind of like, whatever, just record me and get me out there? Like,
well, I'm sure there are guys out there that are vanilla with it. We'll call it that, but I think every artist has a vision of what they want their thing to be. They want it to sound like, or they want it to be presented like. The problem is, at least the problem for many, many years, certainly let's call it 2005, was that the artist was on stage, right? So they had no sense of what was actually being presented to their audience. They couldn't.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. The difference between front of house and monitor world.
It's chalk and cheese. I mean, there's
it's completely different things. So what they hear as a monitor engineer is completely different versus what's coming out of front of house. And so for our listeners, that's
well, I mean, so here's the funny part of it. So they kind of rely on people, maybe not even me, the mixer, but they rely on other people to come back and tell them how it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a wife, maybe it's another musician, maybe it's whatever, who's out listening and go, they'll talk to him in the dressing room and go, how was it? Well, blah, 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 blah. So they try to connect the dots that way.
And the sad part about that is the wife could be sitting in a bad area, or could be sitting in I have this one group that the Wolverines in Pocatello, and they're pretty good. It's a bluegrass band, but the wife always sits right next to the speaker, and it's always hard for me to deal with because I'm sitting further back. I get the full mix, and it's always interesting to deal with that kind of thing. So, well,
the thing that changed that is virtual sound check, right?
Yeah.
So, I'll tell you this little story because I love telling this story because it was just such a cool kind of watershed moment for that whole concept. So, I started developing virtual sound check in the early, let's call it mid 90s, around 1994. I was doing it in analog for a period of years, just kind of trying to work it out and see if it was valid and, see if it was going to be a real thing. And long story short, I was doing it on Tom Petty. I was doing it on Rush through the 90s, and none of the artists knew about it. Right. I would always do it pre an actual sound check because I didn't know how they were going to respond to it. I was like, I don't know. So I kind of kept it hidden from them. I didn't show it to them in any way, shape, or form. I would come in and do it before the actual sound checks and before the line checks to kind of do PA tuning and all kinds of things using ADATs and Pro Tools and other things by the late 90s. But once I went to work for AVID, it kind of became this kind of thing where it's like, well, we need to get this actually into a product and make it an actual process and an actual workflow. So, I kind of worked over my first few years at AVID, trying to get that pushed into place. And we did that in 2005, 2006, right around there with the release of the first Venue console, which had virtual sound check capabilities, actual virtual sound check capabilities. So the first time I ever took it out and used it under fire was on Tom Petty. So we were in rehearsals in 2005 at Sony, I think at the Sony stages in Los Angeles, full PA system, full lighting, everything, you know. And we had gone through a couple of days of rehearsals, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to come in and run virtual sound check through its paces here, and come in early one day, 10 in the morning, whatever, and just break everything down into its smallest components and listen and rebuild and just see what was really going on here, really kind of tunnel in on it. So I'm in there. I'm the only one in the room. At least I think I'm the only one in the room. And just tearing things apart and, listening to vocals raw, listening to guitars raw, everything, only to realize that in the back of the room, Tom has come in early, right? He's sitting on a couch in the back of the room. And I didn't realize it. He had come in for an interview, and the interview was late or whatever. So he was just sitting, listening to me work. So this went on for a good, maybe an hour and a half, couple of hours. And he comes strolling up to the console, and I was like, "Oh, hey, when'd you get here?" And he goes, "I got here about 10." And of course, you had this moment in your mind of, "Oh my God, what did this guy just hear me do to his music?" Yeah. But the cool thing about it is he totally got it. Like, he got it from the get-go. He was like, because it's a studio workflow. It's just like him sitting in the control room, listening to tracks and building mixes. So he totally got it. And the best thing about it was, and he said it, he was like, I've never, ever been able to hear how my music's being presented to my fans, and I'm hearing it here now. And we kind of worked on a few things together. And all of a sudden, he was just, from that moment forward, he was a different guy on stage. Like, his confidence in the show, his confidence in the show changed.
Okay.
Like, if he was hearing something that felt odd in monitors, he would, I don't want to say he would let it go, but it didn't flip him out thinking, "Oh my God, it's horrible out front." He knew what it was out front. Matter of fact, we had a little revisit of it one day when things in monitor land were not going great. I don't remember what venue it was, but he was having some trouble up on stage, and he decided he was just going to come out and listen to hear it. And, this was when we had switched over to line source. So, the rejection in the back of the PA was pretty amazing. Yeah. So he comes walking off stage, and the band is playing, and he comes out, and he made it about 30 feet out in front of the PA. And then I started to turn around and just walk back to the stage. And he got back over and he goes, no, everything's good out there.
We're good.
We got to work up here for a few minutes.
Wow, that's awesome.
But, the long and the short of it is, like I said, he really saw the big picture that day at Sony. And from that tour forward, I think on the first week of that tour, we did 4 or 5 actual sound checks where he would come in with the band and they would sound check. And then from that point in 2005 till the end of his career in 2017, we never did another actual sound check.
That's amazing.
Oh, wow. He trusted that process implicitly, So, of course, we would come in, like if we had to go do a broadcast or whatever and do camera blocking, they would come in for that. But on tour, we never did another sound check. We did another actual sound check. That's
amazing. Can you talk about working with AVID and how you got involved with them? And then the fact that you helped develop the virtual sound check process, that to me is just awe-inspiring. So well, if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, if I can, I'd like to just kind of add to that too, which is just obviously you've seen all the analog, you've seen all the digital, and you and AVID and other companies like them, like you guys are the innovators that made that transition. Yeah. So I wondered, not only would you talk about your experience at AVID, but would you talk about some of just the biggest hurdles to overcome in making that analog to digital?
Yeah. Okay. So let's take it in 2 steps there. I'll talk about the entry at AVID first. So that is something that came completely out of the blue to me. And the story of it is actually kind of cool. So in the 1980s, in the mid 80s, I was touring with an artist named Laurie Anderson. It's kind of, avant-garde kind of performance art kind of thing. It was absolutely an awesome tour to be on. We toured the world. The keyboard player on that tour was a guy named Dave LeBolt, right? He was the head keyboard player and, kind of working with Laurie to get all these incredible keyboard things going on that tour. It was just mind-blowing. But he and I really hit it off. We hit it off very, very well. We became pretty close friends on the tour. as touring friends, kind of, we'll put those kind of quotations about it. But we would hang out on days off, blah, 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 and talk about a lot of things. And we were always talking about, oh man, if we could only do this. And yeah, if we could only do this. Well, tour ends. I go off on other things. He goes off on other things, other keyboard assignments, et cetera. And then over a period of years, I had heard through the grapevine that David had gone to work for DigiDesign, right? And lo and behold, he got into a position there where he was driving the development of Pro Tools when it was coming out of the new bus era, and really turning into an actual powerhouse of a studio product, where the DAW was really starting to make its impact. So he did that whole stretch of the 90s where, Pro Tools developed really, really intensely. So now we're 15 years away from us, hanging out together and being together. And I get a call completely out of the blue one day. This was probably in 1999, 2000, maybe somewhere around there. And he goes, "Hey, Rob, it's Dave." I was like, "Hey, what's going on, man? Long time no love, blah, blah, blah." He goes, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a live sound product. I want you to come up to Daly City and meet with me. And let's sit down and discuss it and see what you think we can do, and whether we can pull this off." So, I had a lot of apprehension about digital at the time. I certainly had a lot of apprehension about DigiDesign doing anything digital for live sound at the time. But after some meetings and, some cool napkin drawings, which I always say, I wish I still had those napkin drawings, man.
Right.
They were so cool. Within, about a 5-year design cycle there, I kind of worked as a, kind of a super consultant on the thing, where I wasn't working for the company, but they were bringing me in to validate ideas and concepts and stuff, and, develop those sorts of things. Lo and behold, Venue comes out into the market, and, there was a lot of apprehension about it, but that turned out to be a really, really cool thing. I think if that console was the first one to the market, it would have failed horribly. But luckily Yamaha kind of seeded the market for us and made digital viable for live sound. And then we kind of came in and put our own spin on it, and had really, really incredible success with that, more than I ever dreamed we would ever have with those products. So at some point in 2005, 2006, they just said, "Hey, do you want to just come to work for us? I mean, can we just hire you and have you constantly, be a full-time member of this team and develop this thing going forward?" And at that time I was looking to kind of pull back a little bit from touring. I mean, I had kids, and, I think I was up to about 2 kids, maybe 3 by then, and wanted to stay home and be dad a little bit. So, as it turned out, I didn't really pull back from touring very much. I had actually ended up touring and working for AVID through all those years, and still continue to do so today. But that's been a really, really rewarding part of my life, getting to be involved in console design. I mean, I've learned more about it than I ever would have learned just being a user in the field. I'm way more probably pro digital than people are comfortable with sometimes. It's like, the conversion from analog to digital is 2 things, right? One is workflow. You have to learn a completely different mindset in terms of console operation. I mean, certainly there's some similarities at one level between analog and digital, but it's also learning how to deal with signal quality differently than in analog. And I'm not one of these people that say we should go back to everything analog. We shouldn't. I'm completely pro digital, but I'm not anti-analog either. We need them both. We don't, it's not a binary argument. We're not going to go back to having one or the other. They're both going to be here, and they both have their rightful place in this world. Digital haters, I'm sorry, it's going to be here for a while. But the cool, and I've said this from very early on. I think I learned this very early on. In digital, you can have the best of both worlds. You can get something that has analog sound quality to it and still have all the digital flexibility and capability at your fingertips as well. Now, if you want to be a purist and go analog, by all means, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. But, you're in terms of other pieces of it, I don't want to even say you're sacrificing it, but you're leaving a lot of possibility off the table by going to analog and just saying, I've just got to have the clearest signal path, and that's it. Not only have I got to have the cleanest signal path, I've got to have the dirtiest signal path, because it's got to sound analog.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's kind of one of those things, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that, as technology advances, it's always been about higher fidelity, cleaner, whatever, higher resolution, whatever. But in audio engineering specifically, I mean, part of it is to try and make it sound old. Like it is to try and replicate old sounds and that sort of thing, and you see it even in like design or art or whatever, we've got all these.
We see it in film as well, film and photo.
Add age, so it's kind of funny how the technological advancement is actually to improve upon the old way of doing things.
Well, it's part of the programming that's taken place in Western civilization specifically for the last 50 or 60 years, right? What think about what we equate film compared to video with. Film is a credible art. Video is a low-cost solution to getting product out, right?
Well,
put film look on video, now all of a sudden it looks more credible.
Yeah,
it's a very similar thing in the audio world as well. And the irony of all ironies, I've talked ad nauseum about this. This is the irony of audio, in my opinion, is that for years and years, I lived through these decades. Audio engineers wanted this. I need a signal that has no distortion. I need a signal that has no harmonic coloration in it. I need to be able to transport it without any degradation. Blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah. That's digital.
Yeah.
That's what digital provided. It's exactly what digital provided to the audio community. So, and it's not some conspiracy by the manufacturers to change the world. They provided exactly what the audio community was asking for. Only to find out when it got there, it's like, well, hang on a minute. That doesn't sound right. It actually does sound right. It sounds exactly like the source. It just doesn't sound like what we've been listening to for the last 50 or 60 years. It doesn't sound like the music we love of the 60s and 70s, because that music has all of those artifacts in it, let alone the music itself. That's a whole different discussion. But if you want to talk just pure sound quality, nothing rivals digital in terms of sound quality. In terms of a representation of the original, analog doesn't even come close to that. Right.
Well, and it's like you said, everyone's trying to get the feel or the sound of what the analog was doing to it. And now the plugins are getting to the point where they're almost as good. You can't really tell the difference almost.
Well, they're good enough. That's what I say. And especially for live sound, you have to look through that. If we're talking live sound here, not studio now, let's stay in the live sound world. There's a practicality that comes with it in live sound, right? If I want to make something sound more analog, or if heaven forbid, we want to add tape saturation to something, that's something we've never had in live sound, because we don't have tape machines out there, right? Yep. I mean, that was the epiphany I had when I made the full transition from studio to live sound. That was the one that I couldn't quite map out. It was like, okay, I know what this works in the studio. Why am I not getting that result here? And then honestly, it didn't dawn on me for years and years and years. It's like the tape compression is what's missing right now.
Mm-hmm.
The tape compression. And I remember the first time I put on some tape compression plugins on a digital console, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. Well, it's that combination of even an autoharmonic in a compressed format, a compression format where you go, of course. That's what analog tape is doing. That's why we aligned tape machines the way we did, was to get that to happen. Right?
Yeah. Well, and you also got to think of ease of use too. If you're backlining in a stage, you hit a button and sound check's done. It's the same thing.
Well, it's a little more than
in between tracks even. Yeah, you know what I mean. But like you can do a sound check in advance, save the presets and go and work on another band and come back, and it's right there ready to go.
Yes.
That by itself is a major selling point for digital boards.
The learning curve for digital, this is part of what makes the learning curve for digital so stiff sometimes and so steep, is that, if we want to get credible analog results in digital, we have to put them in there. Like we have to add them. So what it actually requires is that you kind of go back in time and learn why things sounded the way they did. Right. It's not just one thing. It's not just distorting the signal at this point in the chain. It's a whole series of things that need to take place there to make it credible analog sounding. Right. You brought up the Dave Rat thing, which I thought is, I watched one of his recently that was really interesting on Transformers. Right.
I watched that one.
Transformers, changed the sound. Yeah, they do. And
Yep.
it's not a matter of choosing which one is right. It's choosing which one is preferable. Which one do
Yeah.
I want it to sound like? Right. And transformers are one small piece of that analog sound. That's why people want to go through transformers to get specific sounds. I want preamps that use Lindahl transformers, right? Because they sound a specific way. It's not about making it sound natural. It's about making it sound preferable, right?
Exactly.
Nothing we do in pop music and rock music sounds natural. Nothing.
So we're starting to get towards the end of the hour here. I wanted to ask you one thing. It's sort of come up throughout or been sprinkled sort of throughout our conversation, but it's this idea about mentorship. And I think there's this idea that, here you are, this expert, that you're this lone wolf and you've done all this and you've accomplished all these things, right? And I don't think there's enough time paid to it. And you mentioned like in your own teaching and stuff like that, the importance of sort of mentorship to you. So I wondered if you wouldn't go back and talk a little bit about just sort of the people who helped you along the way and sort of the value of mentorship for you in the past, and maybe you now paying that forward to students or whomever you're working with.
Yeah, certainly pay it forward is the right term to use associated with it. I certainly feel, I guess obligation is the right word. I certainly feel obligation to do that. I mean, I look, it seems like every year I look back on it and I get more and more respectful of what those people did for me when I was young. I just look back on it and just think, man, where would I be if I hadn't met that guy? If I hadn't met that guy, where would I be right now? Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? Because, they either take you under their wing and teach you something really critical or really important that kind of changes the direction of what you do and where you go and the results you get. It's just these little bitty steps of it throughout your career that get you farther and farther along. Like, I've had mentors at AVID that have taught me things about, digital technology, about audio, about business, about branding, about all of it that I'm sitting here talking to you today. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today without that, So, I try to go back and thank these people personally, certainly some of the people in the very earliest days of me getting a job, my first job in audio, I've tried to pay them great homage and go back and always try to give them recognition, et cetera. But, there's a respect that comes with it as well, where you have to respect, how do I want to put this? You have to respect what you say to people as a mentor. Like as a mentor, you had to be very, very aware of what you're saying and what you're teaching to people, because people, over time, I've certainly learned it's like people are hanging on your every word here. Mm-hmm. So make sure what you're saying is as right as it can be. Don't. And unfortunately, we see a lot of this in the business today with the internet, and YouTube and all of this. Man, there are a lot of charlatans out there, a lot of charlatans. And I just I know I'm going to sound like you're going to probably respond and go, okay, boomer. But man, there is a lot of bad information out there right now. I mean, really bad information, really errant, wrong information. I follow some of these live sound chats and rooms on Facebook and YouTube and stuff. And I just think, oh my gosh, what are you telling these people, man? And it's people that are, the worst part about it, the worst element of it, it's that, and if you've been around for a long time, you can spot it a mile away. It's people who are still very new to the business, speaking with absolute authority.
Yeah.
And it's, that's kind of the crime of the internet is there's no accountability for it. They don't have to be accountable for what they're saying just on some internet chat room.
Speaking with authority is often enough. It's funny. I always joke, because there were times when we were on tour that I'd forget my badges or whatever, and I couldn't get backstage. And so my thought was always just walk with purpose, right? Have authority. Just kind of. And
how often did it work? Yeah.
Almost every time.
Every time.
These were smaller venues. I wasn't trying to get back to, Steve Perry or something. I was trying to get back to my roadie, but so it wasn't that big a deal. But I think that idea sort of permeates, which is this, if you can come off authentic or come off authoritative, I guess is a better word, it doesn't really matter what you're saying, and people will sort of buy it, and they'll buy your program, or they'll get into whatever it is you're doing, and it's just rampant.
Well, not only will they buy it, and here's the harm: it programs in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the thing that made me start to respect this more, and it was part of the thing that drove me in teaching. It's why I got as much out of the teaching as probably the students did. Is I had this thing of, if I'm going to teach it, I got to know it forwards and backwards, and 100%. I got to get it kind of peer reviewed. Okay, this is what I plan on saying. Is this right? Is this accurate? That whole kind of thing, because I've experienced it where someone has taught me something very early in my career, and here I am 40 years later now. And when something like that comes up, I still have to kind of go, nope, it's not what they told you. This is what actually happens there. I still do it to this day, 40 years later.
It's one of the things that we've uncovered in doing this podcast and interviewing so many people of different ilk, is that there's a little bit of life that is just layering stuff on, right? Like you have to have done the time. And so you get these people that come out and, like you mentioned, they're kind of new to the industry. Maybe they've just been working in their local market or something, and now they're the expert, right? And I think that there's just something to this time served. I equate your experience as you've described it, from going from analog to digital, and from the way you did it in the 70s to the way you do it now. Like, my journey was sort of like that with technology, right? Like, there was a time when if I wanted to be online, I had to learn how to program, right? If I wanted to have an internet connection, I had to learn how to get connected. I had to do all these things. And maybe it's just age, but we have the benefit of having worked through that, right? At the time, you might not have seen it as a benefit, but it seems like for people like you've got such a thick layer cake of experience.
Yeah.
You're able to put together decisions, or like you said, spot the fake, without even having to think about it, because you've been there, done that, and innovated the technology, right? And so for me, it's the same. And I think for most people it is, but for like you mentioned about accountability, these folks can just go online and basically can shout into a vacuum, and they're not getting criticism from people like you saying, wait a minute, buddy, like, do you even know what you're
Well, actually they are. If you see some of my responses,
the comments, right?
I'm not too kind with it sometimes.
Maybe you specifically.
Well, and I think it's, what is it, the term talent stacking? You develop you figure out one thing, and then you figure out something that associates with that one thing, and then you figure out something else that ties to that, and all of a sudden it all starts to make sense, and you actually develop an ear for what you're doing, and you can hear this stuff and do this, and you're like, oh, I did this one time and it fixed this, and just all the different things that you've done over the course of your career add up to this collaborate.
There's also a process that I do, though, and I try to encourage people to always be open to do this, is I'm always looking for ways to validate what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, if something's working today, it's like, okay, well, that worked great. But is that going to become part of my approach? Like, is that going to work for everything? Or is it, how do I actually back off and validate what I just did there and say, yeah, okay, that's actually working there. Because people take everything at kind of face value. And to some degree, I have reverence for people that are just coming into the business now. I mean, I think about the amount of information and choices and things that are laid at their feet that they need to kind of dig through and learn, compared to what I went through, 30 or 40 years ago. What was, I mean, how many mixers did we have to choose from?
Many options.
We had two. They were credible, I mean, it was Midas and Yamaha. I mean, I'm over exaggerating that, but still the amount of, I mean, I look at things like, silly things like, okay, in 1979, what microphones did we have at our disposal in live sound?
58.
It was
Was that even around?
Yeah, it was around.
Yeah.
It was around, but it was new. It was kind of new to the market.
Yeah.
Compared to the sheer amount of microphones that
to me
kind of go through and kind of go, okay, well, which one is this going to solve my problem? It's just like, whoo.
That's something I'm fairly new. I've only been doing audio for live music for 5-6 years now, and every day I learn something else. I'll try a different technique, or I'll use a different mic on this and that, and like you said, it's overwhelming to just, okay, let's just give it a try, see what it does, and then go from there. It's kind of fun, actually. But
well, Petty gave me
I love it.
the great mindset to have for that, because we were going through changes and trying different amplifiers and blah blah blah, guitar amps and stuff, and apparently he's like this in the studio all the time as well, which was, hey man, good is good. If it's good, move on. Don't sit here and dwell on it, and try to change it. If it's doing what you needed to do, then move on. Let's make some music at the end of the day. Let's not get caught up in microphone choices.
Yep.
Said the guy who's sitting here talking into a 40-year-old microphone. And
I was going to ask you, what is that microphone? I see the case around it. And I don't recognize it.
I mean, I pulled it out of my stash of freaking hundreds of microphones back here.
I'm sure you have it
over the course collection. Of doing different podcasts. Let's try this one today. So, but it's a Beyer. I don't even know the model. Okay. Maybe a 308. I think it's 308. I mean, nice. It's an old ribbon microphone from them. And of all the ribbons I tried, I thought this was the best sounding one of my voice. So
yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah. Awesome. It's been fun to pull that out and get it going.
Yeah. Well, cool, Robert. So I think we're kind of at that time. Is there anything you want to give out as far as ways our listeners might be able to get in touch with you, where they can learn more about the work you're doing, maybe seek out your mentorship or purchase a product from you at AVID?
Sure. I mean, if you want to follow me, there's probably, I just got rid of Twitter, so I won't go on the political rant, but I just dumped Twitter.
Yep.
I'm not on that anymore, but you can reach me on Instagram for sure. You can follow me there. Robert Scovill. If you want to follow me on Facebook, it's Robert Scovill with one L, unfortunately, on Facebook. If you want to look at it, I've got a ton of video posted up on YouTube, tutorials on how to do certain things. Most of it's console specific, but there's also a bunch of blogs up there. Like I've done touring blogs where I've blogged every day of the tour, and you can go up and look back on days of the tour. So again, just search my name, Robert Scovill, on YouTube. I run a Friday social meeting called the Back Lounge. Nice. If you go to robertscovill.com, you can sign up for that, and it's just free entry. You just come in and hang out and talk with us, just like the back lounge of a bus. Just come on in and shoot the breeze. So that's available. That's usually on Fridays we started at 4:20 Pacific time. So just sign up, get on the email list, and the link shows up every week for you to do that.
Love it.
What else? I
found you on LinkedIn, and
I was going to say I'm on LinkedIn as well. And finally, I've just started posting up as kind of what brought you there. I think all of these walk-in music playlists from tours that I've done in the past. I'm in the process of compiling them all, but there's probably 25 different playlists created by different artists on my Spotify profile. So if you want to search me out on Spotify, you can follow those and share those playlists. Those are really fun to listen to.
Yeah, I've really.
It's a nice break from Mariah Carey for the holidays. If you want. Right. Break off of All I Want for Christmas and get some Muddy Waters in your life.
There you go.
So cool. Well, thank you so much, Robert. We really appreciate you taking the time for this. It's been awesome. Just hearing about your backstory and sort of the way technology moves. It's an awesome industry, and Mike and I both love it. So I appreciate you taking the time.
We're going forward, guys, not back. We're not going to go back. So let's keep going forward.
I love it. Well, thanks so much, everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.